In just 6 short minutes on a flight to Dallas, a black woman was humiliated under dozens of staring eyes. She was asked to leave her first-class seat simply because she didn't look like someone who could afford it. They later called it a small misunderstanding. But if it were you judged, questioned, and shamed for the color of your skin or the clothes you wore, what would you do? Get angry? Stay silent? She chose something else. Calm, intelligence, and justice. No one on that plane knew that the quiet woman they'd looked down on was the one who held the power to decide the airline's fate. 6 minutes later, when the truth came out, the world turned upside down. This story isn't about a plane ticket. It's about the seat of human dignity and self-respect. It reminds us that sometimes real strength isn't in how loud we respond, but in how steady we remain when insulted. That justice isn't just the right to be respected, but the choice to forgive and to lead others toward what's right. And what about you? Could you stay calm like she did, or would you let anger take control? Let's hear the story of Ava Robinson, the woman who made an entire sky fall silent and reminded us of one simple, powerful truth. Dignity is something no one can take from you unless you give it away. If you believe kindness and fairness still have a place in our world, hit like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel where we tell true stories that touch the heart and remind us all that sometimes, when even one person chooses calm over anger, the whole sky can change. Ava Robinson stepped into the first-class cabin that morning with the quiet poise of someone who'd spent years navigating the business world. No heavy makeup, no designer watch, no monogrammed leather briefcase. Just a simple beige linen dress, a slightly worn shoulder bag, and a calm, steady gaze. She smiled politely at the flight attendant guiding passengers to their seats, held up her e-ticket on her phone, and walked toward seat 1A, the window seat at the front of the cabin. Barely 10 seconds later, a cold, clipped voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, this seat is for first-class passengers only." "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" The speaker was Melissa Crane, the head flight attendant. Ava looked up, her polite smile still in place. "No, I'm not mistaken. This is my seat. It's right there on the ticket 1A. Melissa frowned. Her eyes flicked over Ava's simple dress, the modest shoes that weren't polished to a shine, and finally, the canvas crossbody bag. In those few seconds, every assumption, prejudice, and silent judgment flashed behind her eyes. An electronic ticket. Let me see your ID, Melissa said, her voice rising slightly. A few passengers began to turn their heads. Ava handed over her documents, her tone calm and even. "I understand. It's good to be thorough. But could you lower your voice? Please, I'd rather not disturb the entire cabin." That one sentence, quiet but precise, made Melissa's cheeks flush red. She turned to a colleague and spoke louder than she needed to. "Can you double-check her booking code? Might be a system error or a fake ticket." From a few rows back, a middle-aged white man, Victor Langley, gave a dry chuckle. "I'm telling you, people can fake anything these days. Just look at her, doesn't exactly scream first class. Does she?" Another harsh laugh followed from seat 2B, but Ava, she just sat there, looking out the window. Something in her silence made the entire cabin feel heavier. 6 minutes passed long enough to feel like a lifetime. 6 minutes where a woman sat quietly, watched, judged, and doubted not because she'd done anything wrong, but because her appearance didn't match someone else's idea of belonging. Then Melissa came back, her face a mix of suspicion and confusion. "The ticket is real, but I've never seen a first-class passenger without at least some luxury carry-on." "Are you sure you?" Ava interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not sure about many things, Miss Crane, but I'm sure of this. I don't need a Prada bag to prove my worth." The entire cabin went still. A few passengers began pulling out their phones to record. Among them was Sophia Nguyen, a young woman in seat 3C, known for filming little stories from the sky. This time, her camera happened to capture something much bigger, a story about human dignity. Melissa faltered, forcing an awkward smile. "Just following protocol. Ma'am, please don't take it personally." Protocol? Ava raised an eyebrow. "What protocol says a person's appearance determines the value of their ticket?" The air grew thick. Even Victor Langley, who had mocked her moments ago, lowered his newspaper, pretending to read. Up front, Captain Jordan Miles received an internal call. "Passenger 1A is causing an issue." He handed control to his co-pilot and stepped out of the cockpit. When his eyes landed on Ava, he froze. He recognized that name from the company's internal files: Ava Robinson, CEO of Aurelia Air Group, the very investor who had poured millions into modernizing this airline's fleet. "What's going on here?" Jordan asked, voice low but commanding. Melissa stiffened, her confidence faltering. This passenger seemed out of place. "Sir, I was just doing my job." Jordan paused, then turned to Ava, his tone softening. "My apologies, Mrs. Robinson. I didn't expect to see you on this flight." The cabin fell utterly silent. Every eye turned toward Ava, the same woman they had doubted, mocked, and judged, and Ava, still sitting tall, simply said, "It's all right. We'll talk after landing." In those 6 minutes, the balance of power had completely shifted without a single raised voice. Ava didn't lash out. She didn't argue. But her calm gaze alone was enough to make Melissa feel she'd lost something far greater than her composure. She'd lost her respect for another human being. From the back, Jamal Reeves, an independent journalist, began taking notes. He knew this moment would be remembered long after the plane touched down. As Melissa stepped back, Ava exhaled softly, eyes turning toward the clouds outside. Perhaps she'd grown used to being doubted. But this time was different because now she was no longer the one who had to stay silent just to keep moving forward. When Captain Jordan Miles returned to the cockpit, the air in the first-class cabin still hadn't settled. Everyone was silent, but it was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like lead. Ava Robinson sat back in seat 1A, placed her phone on the tray table, and quietly switched it to airplane mode. No sighs, no accusing glances, just a composure so calm it made everyone else uneasy. She didn't know, or perhaps she knew all too well, that her silence was the deepest reflection of all. At the front, Melissa Crane still held her clipboard, taking deep breaths, trying to regain control of the situation. But the eyes of her colleagues at the end of the cabin made her lose confidence with every passing second. She whispered into her earpiece, "Double-check the passenger list for seat 1A. Maybe the system made a mistake." A voice crackled back through the line. "No mistake. Melissa, the ticket's confirmed and paid directly from the Aurelia Air Group corporate account." Melissa squinted, letting out a sharp breath, not of surprise, but of irritation. It wasn't the result she wanted. She'd never been good at hiding her discomfort when facing someone she thought didn't fit the first-class profile. In her mind, first class had a type-fair skin, expensive clothes, the confident attitude of wealth, and Ava, with her quiet simplicity, was the living contradiction to all of that. A few passengers began murmuring. From seat 2B, Victor Langley, the man who'd mocked her earlier, spoke again, his voice raspy, still dripping with condescension. "I told you, didn't I? These days, people think they can just sit wherever they want. She should know her place. Across the aisle. Sophia Nguyen, the young assistant with curious eyes and a bright face, tightened her grip on her phone. At first, she hadn't planned to record anything, only to capture a small mix-up between a passenger and a flight attendant. But after hearing Victor's words, her hand trembled slightly. In her eyes, curiosity faded, replaced by a growing urge to capture the truth. The camera turned toward Ava, sitting quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. No arguing, no anger, but every subtle movement radiated an unshakable calm. Melissa approached again, her voice carefully controlled, yet tinged with defense. "Ms. Robinson, I was only following procedure. I hope you understand not everyone is allowed in this section." Ava lifted her gaze, steady and serene. "I understand. But have you ever asked yourself who decides who's allowed to sit where A paws hung in the air?" Melissa pressed her lips together, unsure how to answer. The question wasn't only for her, it hung between them all, like a mirror held up to the entire cabin. Victor scoffed again. "Philosophy now? On this plane, money buys you a better seat. It's that simple." Ava turned to him. Her eyes weren't angry, only sad. The kind of sadness that comes from seeing the same thing too many times before. "Yes," she said softly, "and I'm fortunate. I paid for this seat with money I earned myself, not anyone else's." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried clear and steady enough to make the whole cabin hold its breath. From the back, Jamal Reeves, an independent journalist who'd written extensively on social justice, scribbled notes into a small notebook. He knew what he was witnessing wasn't just a seating dispute. It was a microcosm of society where prejudice disguised itself as procedure, and discrimination hid within the most ordinary routines. Melissa pulled out her internal phone, pretending to be busy to avoid Ava's gaze. But just then, a message flashed across her screen from the airline's headquarters. "Report the incident involving passenger 1 No. Stay calm and record everything." Her jaw tightened. Now she was the one being watched. Meanwhile, Ava remained still. She tilted her head slightly toward the window, watching as dawn began to break through the clouds. Her calm strangely made others feel ashamed of their own unease. Sophia whispered quietly to Jamal. "She doesn't even have to raise her voice. So why does it feel like everyone else gets smaller when she sits that still?" Jamal replied, his tone low and thoughtful, "Because sometimes power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from refusing to sink into the same mud as everyone else." That single sentence, quiet yet sharp, sealed the meaning of the moment. The real confrontation had begun. This was no longer about a flight attendant checking a ticket or a passenger being questioned. It was the instant when prejudice took form, plain, visible, undeniable. Melissa, once confident in her procedure, realized she was doing exactly what the company had worked so hard to avoid, judging a passenger not by data, but by appearance. Victor, used to the comfort of privilege, felt the unfamiliar weight of eyes no longer on his side. And Ava, who had faced hundreds of board meetings and life-or-death decisions for her company, realized something too. Some battles aren't fought on paper. They unfold right here, in airplane seats, in silence, between human beings. A younger flight attendant, Hannah, stepped forward and whispered nervously to Melissa, "Ma'am, maybe we should just leave her be. I double-checked she really is a first-class passenger, and I think she's the CEO." Melissa's face drained of color. She turned sharply toward Ava for the first time, the arrogance gone from her eyes. You're the CEO," Ava answered gently. neither confirming nor denying. I'm someone who believes every customer deserves the same respect. What do you think about that, Miss Crane?" The question, soft as a sigh, froze Melissa in place. All her self-appointed authority crumbled, exposing something rawer and more human fear. Not just fear of losing her job, but fear that she'd been wrong in how she saw people. Sophia's camera was still rolling. In its frame, viewers would later see a black woman sitting quietly, yet forcing an entire system to stop and look at itself. And then, as morning light poured through the cabin windows, the story shifted. Outside, the sky remained clear, but inside, invisible lines between above and below, trusted and doubted, power and prejudice began to crack. The real storm hadn't arrived yet, but in that stillness, everyone, passengers and viewers alike, could feel it coming. Something was about to change. Forever. The air inside Aurelia Flight 221's first-class cabin had turned suffocating. Everyone pretended not to hear, not to see, yet eyes still drifted towards Seat 1A, where a silent confrontation was unfolding. After several long minutes, Melissa Crane returned. She had just received confirmation that Ava was indeed a legitimate passenger, in fact. Her name appeared in the airline's executive system, but instead of feeling remorse, Melissa felt something else rising within her confusion, laced with wounded pride. In her 12 years on the job, Melissa had always believed she was a fair person. She dealt with hundreds of passengers, from celebrities to ordinary travelers, and always thought she was simply following procedure. But this morning, facing this black woman, something in her had been exposed, and she hated that feeling, the feeling of being seen through. Her voice came out sharp, brittle. "I'm just doing my job." But clearly, some people always know how to turn everything into a race issue. The words dropped into the cabin like a stone heavy, echoing. Ova looked up, not out of anger but surprise. Her gaze met Melissa's, calm yet piercing. "What did you just say?" Melissa gave a cold, dismissive smirk. "You know, you people always pull that card." The air froze. Those two words, "you people," might sound ordinary to some, but in America, they carried centuries of weight derision, exclusion, and contempt. The entire cabin went still. Victor Langley, who had mocked Ava earlier, wasn't laughing anymore. Row 3's passengers looked down, avoiding one another's eyes. Sophia Nian, still recording on her phone, felt her heart pound. She knew something irreversible had just happened. Ava didn't rise from her seat. She spoke quietly, each word deliberate, as if commanding her own restraint. Record that. 3 words soft as breath, yet they shifted the entire atmosphere. Sophia gripped her phone tighter and kept filming. Her camera caught Melissa's face, a flicker of fear beneath a thin mask of defiance. "I didn't mean anything by it," Melissa stammered. "I was just saying Ava cut in." Her tone, even and cool as glass. No need to explain. Sometimes words speak louder than the person who says them. From the back, Jamal Reeves, the journalist, lowered his pen. A chill ran through him. After years covering stories of injustice, he'd seen hundreds of such moments, but rarely one met with such unshakable calm. The silence inside the cabin was no longer just silence. It had become the sound of realization, the weight of a moral line that had just been crossed. Ava looked straight at Melissa. "Do you realize that in the last 6 minutes, you've taught everyone here exactly how prejudice works?" Melissa's mouth opened, then closed again, the words in her head. "I didn't mean it. I was just doing my job. I'm not a bad person." All suddenly felt hollow. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression free of anger. What saddens me isn't that you doubted me. It's that you don't even realize how many people you've insulted with just one phrase. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting light across Ava's face. It wasn't the light of fragility. It was the calm radiance of someone who had faced injustice too many times and chosen not to let it wound her dignity. From row 2, a woman whispered, "She's incredible." Ava turned to her and smiled faintly. "Not incredible. Just tired of proving I deserve the seat I already paid for." The entire cabin felt suspended in time. No one dared to speak. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade into the distance. At the back, Sophia looked at her phone screen where morning light reflected off Ava's face. In that glow, she didn't just see a woman enduring humiliation. She saw a living emblem of quiet strength. Melissa, meanwhile, was unraveling. She turned toward Victor, seeking solidarity, but he only lowered his head. For the first time, she realized she was utterly alone, not because anyone abandoned her, but because she had crossed a line no one could defend. Her voice shook. I'm sorry, Ms. Robinson." "I shouldn't have said that," Ava replied with that same calm tone, gentle, yet immovable. "Apologies are a good start. But real change begins when you understand why you had to say it." The words sliced cleanly through the last remnants of Melissa's pride. Her hands trembled around her clipboard. In that moment, the balance of power in first class completely shifted, not through rank, not through anger, but through the sheer force of composure. Jamal leaned slightly toward Sophia and whispered, "She's not the victim anymore." The moment she said, "Record that," she became the witness, the truth itself. Sophia nodded. She knew that this video, once posted, wouldn't just stir outrage, it would hold up a mirror to society, revealing how small prejudices hide in moments that seem harmless. Ava exhaled softly, as if setting down a weight she'd carried for years. She hadn't won anything. She had simply kept her self-respect, something not everyone can do in such a moment. From the next row, an elderly white woman gently touched Ava's shoulder. "I feel ashamed for not speaking up sooner." Ava turned to her and smiled. "No one's born knowing better. But every time we stay silent, we choose the side of the one who causes harm." The woman's eyes filled with tears. The tension began to fade, but no one in that cabin would ever forget that moment. 6 minutes earlier, Ava had been humiliated. Now, it was the witnesses who felt exposed, forced to confront the quiet biases in themselves. As Melissa stepped back, her hands shaking, she had no idea that her 6 words, "You people always pull that card," and Ava's 3 in return, "Record that," would become the turning point of the entire flight. In the heavy stillness that followed, Melissa stood frozen, while Ava sat unmoving, eyes fixed on the sky ahead. But the storm wasn't over yet. Inside the cockpit, an internal call had just been made, and it would set off a chain of events no one could have imagined. The first-class cabin of Aurelia Flight 227 remained heavy with silence after what had just happened. Ava Robinson's words, record that still hung in the air, clear and calm, yet weighted with awareness. At the front, Melissa Crane, the chief flight attendant, stood frozen, gripping her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't confident. All that was left was fear, not the fear of losing her job, but of realizing she had crossed a line that couldn't be justified. Her careless words had left a mark. And now, Every passenger in the cabin looked at her as if watching a lesson unfold before their eyes. Then, over the intercom, came the captain's voice. "This is Captain Jordan Miles, lead flight attendant. Please meet me in the cockpit for a moment." Melissa flinched. His voice wasn't loud, but something in its tone made her stomach tighten. She hurried down the aisle, heels striking the floor in sharp, hollow clicks. When the cockpit door closed behind her, the cabin stayed still, filled only with the steady hum of the engines. Ava sat quietly, eyes on the window serene, but unmistakably prepared for something bigger. The emotional storm had already hit quietly, invisibly, but sometimes storms don't only shake the ones who've been wronged, they blow apart the illusion of power itself. And then, the next wave came this time, from the cockpit. The door opened. Captain Jordan Miles stepped out. He was a man of few words, the kind who carried the calm weight of years in the sky. But this time, his steps slowed when his gaze found the woman in seat 1A. One glance, and he stopped. A second passed, then another, and his eyes softened, surprise giving way to quiet remorse. "Mrs. Robinson?" he asked softly, almost in disbelief. The cabin froze. Melissa, standing beside him, whipped her head around. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Ava looked up, a faint smile touching her lips. Not proud, not triumphant, just the knowing smile of someone long accustomed to being misjudged. "Hello, Captain Miles." "It's been a while," she said. "I believe the last time we met was at the digital systems test for Aurelia's new fleet upgrade." Her voice was low, measured, but carried through the cabin with quiet power. Jordan inhaled slowly. He remembered. That meeting the woman before him had been Ava Robinson, the investor who had poured tens of millions into Aurelia Air Group's modernization program. Not just an investor, the chairwoman of the board of investments, and technically his superior. Above any manager Melissa had ever reported to. The truth hit like thunder. Ava turned to Melissa, her gaze steady, not cold, not warm, just still. "I think we understand each other now." "Miss Crane." Melissa stood frozen, lips trembling. I didn't know. I had no idea you were." "I know," Ava interrupted gently. "And that's the problem. If you need to know who I am before treating me with respect, then maybe this whole flight is headed in the wrong direction." A few passengers let out soft sighs, not of surprise, but of shame. Victor Langley, the man who had sneered at her earlier, lowered his head, hiding behind his newspaper. Sophia Nguyen, still filming, shifted her camera. She no longer focused on Ava, but on Melissa, whose expression now revealed a simple, devastating truth. Real authority doesn't come from a uniform. It comes from character. Jordan nodded respectfully toward Ava, his eyes an unspoken apology. He knew that after this flight, things would have to change, not just procedures, but the way people saw each other. Ava turned back toward the window, her tone soft but firm. "We'll talk when we land." Those 4 words, "when we land," weren't just a statement. They were a verdict, suspended in the quiet air of an aircraft slicing through the dawn. Melissa stepped back, feeling as if the floor itself tilted beneath her. She didn't know what to do or say. Her heart pounded as excuses circled her mind. "I was just doing my job. I didn't mean any harm. I didn't know who she was." But now, none of it mattered. In the passenger's eyes, she saw what she'd never wanted to see: disappointment. She thought back to the moment it began, when she first questioned Ava. She believed she was defending company standards, but now she understood she'd only been defending her own bias. Ava sat still, Not gloating, not mocking. She didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for itself. No one said a word. Even the engines seemed quiet. A black woman in a simple dress had just stepped out from the shadow of prejudice, not through power or anger, but through truth and dignity. And the one who had wielded control moments ago, Melissa, now stood as the fading shadow of an authority undone. Sophia slowly stopped recording, taking a deep breath. She knew she had captured something that needed no exaggeration, a moment that would speak for itself. Jamal Reeves looked at Ava for a long time. He understood this wasn't just about a plane ticket. It was a mirror, a reflection of the world itself, where prejudice still lived in glances, in habits, in harmless words, and where truth only appeared when someone brave enough stayed calm enough to let it. He wrote 4 words in his notebook: "Justice knows patience." As Jordan returned to the cockpit, he spoke quietly to Melissa, his voice calm, but firm. "You'll need to prepare a public apology, not because of her title, but because of the person you mistreated." Melissa nodded, eyes red. She had never felt smaller, but for the first time, in that smallness, she felt awake. The plane continued its journey. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm golden light across the cabin. No one spoke, but everyone felt the same thing: the world had just shifted in a matter of minutes. Ava looked out the window, resting her hand lightly on the table. There was no triumph in her face, only release, the quiet exhale of someone who had carried the burden too long, and no longer needed to prove herself. The morning sun poured through the windows of Aurelia Flight 227, washing the first-class cabin in soft gold, a quiet ending after a storm. But within that silence, something new was quietly beginning: the power of truth. In her hands, Sophia Nguyen's phone was still recording. She hadn't meant to create a viral video. She just knew this moment shouldn't be forgotten. Every frame, from Melissa Crane's uneasy glances to Ava Robinson's calm, steady smile, carried something no camera could fake: the raw truth and the quiet dignity of being human. Sophia looked down at her screen. Ava sat perfectly still, her hands folded gently on her knees, her eyes turned toward the window, distant, yet full of strength. Sophia didn't know why, but the sight made her throat tighten. Without thinking, she pressed save. After Ava's identity was revealed, no one spoke another word, but that silence spoke louder than anything else. And then, just minutes later, as a small video was shared, the quiet in the cabin became a voice that echoed across the sky. About an hour later, while the plane was still mid-air, the in-flight Wi-Fi flickered back on. Sophia opened her news app and accidentally brushed the share icon. The 6-minute video uploaded, captioned with a single line: "A woman humiliated for her skin color until they found out who she was." She didn't think much of it. It was just an impulse. But what followed was far beyond anything she imagined. Within 10 minutes, Jamal Reeves' phone buzzed. A text popped up from a fellow journalist. "That video's blowing up. It's her." Isn't it? Jamal opened social media and his heart skipped a beat. The clip had already hit 1 million views in just 13 minutes. The comments flooded in. "Who is she? I'm crying." The way she stayed calm, that's real strength. No one should ever be treated like that. Ever. 6 minutes. That's all it took, 6 minutes to make an airline and a society stop and look at itself. Meanwhile, Ava still had no idea her story was spreading around the world. She sat quietly, eyes distant. No one could see what was happening inside her. She wasn't angry, but within her, Another kind of fire was burning, the fire of realization. For years, she had invested in technology, in systems, in things that could be measured. But now, she saw that the most dangerous system wasn't made of wires or code. It lived inside the human mind. She whispered to herself, "You can't fix software if you haven't fixed the people running it." At the back of the cabin, Melissa sat hunched in an empty row. She had overheard everything Captain Jordan confirming that the passenger in 1A was the company's CEO. Now, she watched Ava from afar, no longer as the woman she'd doubted, but as the embodiment of a justice she never believed she'd see in person. A junior flight attendant, Hannah Lee, leaned in and whispered, "I think that video's out there now. I just saw it on my feed. It has both your face and Ms. Robinson's." Melissa froze. She turned toward Ava, who remained calm, as if she'd already foreseen this moment. "You know," Ava said softly, as Melissa approached, "sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen." Melissa said nothing. She didn't apologize again because now every apology felt too small. Online, the video spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up within minutes. Airline CEO faces racial discrimination on her own company's flight. 6 minutes. That changed an airline's image forever. Among hundreds of thousands of comments, one rose to the top, pinned by the uploader. She didn't have to raise her voice. The truth spoke for itself. Jamal looked over at Ava and said quietly, "You know, your story isn't just yours anymore. It's become a reminder for the whole world." Ava nodded. "I don't need them to know I'm a CEO. I just want them to remember no one deserves humiliation because someone else thinks they don't belong." At Aurelia Air Group's Dallas headquarters, phones rang nonstop. The PR department was in chaos. The company's CEO, the same man preparing for a meeting with the FAA, shot to his feet when the video appeared on the big screen. "Dear God, that's Mrs. Robinson." Within 30 minutes, the video surpassed 10 million views. A major news outlet ran the headline, "The woman discriminated against on a plane owns the airline." One columnist wrote, "No PR campaign could ever match the power of raw, unfiltered truth." Back on board, Ava sat still. She didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. She knew the moment had already gone beyond one person. It had become a mirror reflecting a society that desperately needed to see itself. Sophia approached, voice trembling. "Ms. Robinson, I didn't think it would spread so fast. I just felt people needed to see it." Ava smiled gently. "It's all right. Sophia, some truths, if left unseen, would stay asleep forever." Sophia's eyes welled up. The plane began its descent. Through the window, Dallas shimmered under the bright midday sun. Inside, though, the light felt softer, calmer. No one spoke, but everyone could feel it. They had just witnessed a turning point in truth. As the speaker announced the final approach, Ava gazed out the window and whispered, "Justice sometimes only takes 6 minutes to take flight, but a lifetime to land where it belongs." Jamal nodded slowly. He knew that when the plane's wheels touched down, nothing would ever be the same again. High above Texas, Aurelia Flight 227 glided silently toward Dallas. The air in first class was strange, no longer tense, but not yet peaceful. Someone once said, "When truth is revealed, silence is all that remains." But sometimes, silence is the moment when we're forced to face ourselves. As the plane began its descent, everyone thought the storm had passed. But inside a corporation, storms don't end just because people go quiet. Because after every human mistake, There's always a policy ready to act as a shield. And this time, that very policy would stir the wind once more. Melissa Crane returned to the cabin. She had been spoken to by the captain, had heard the company was scrambling to handle a PR crisis, but in her head, one thought echoed again and again. I was just following procedure. She approached Ava Robinson's seat, voice trembling as she tried to sound composed. Mrs. Robinson, I realize this has caused you distress. But you understand I was only following the airline's regulations. We have certain standards for first-class passengers. Ava looked up at her. Her tone was soft as wind, but each word struck the floor with weight. Are you saying your policy allows you to doubt someone simply because they don't look like they can afford a ticket? Melissa froze, her heartbeat quickening. She opened her mouth to speak, but Ava continued. Calm, not harsh, just precise. I understand the need for regulations, but have you ever noticed how people sometimes use the word policy as a shield to protect their own prejudice? The cabin fell utterly silent. Victor Langley, the man who'd mocked Ava earlier, stared down at his shoes. An older woman nearby whispered, She's right. We all do it. Without even realizing, Ava leaned back in her seat, her gaze gentle, but her words heavier than accusation. Miss Crane, what saddens me isn't that you made a mistake. It's that you thought you were right, because a rule stood behind you. Jamal Reeves, the journalist, jotted in his notebook, when policy shields prejudice, justice has no seat. He knew this quiet exchange between two women would outlast any viral video. Melissa's voice trembled. I didn't mean to discriminate. I just thought first-class passengers should meet a certain image. Ava tilted her head slightly. And what image is that? Melissa A. tailored suit, a leather briefcase, or perhaps lighter skin. The air froze again. That question was like a mirror lifted in the middle of the cabin, and everyone saw a bit of themselves in it. If a policy makes people forget to respect one another, Ava continued, then the problem isn't in the person enforcing it, it's in the policy itself. At the cockpit door, Captain Jordan Miles had been listening quietly. He stepped forward and spoke in a low, steady voice. Mrs. Robinson, if I may, she's not a bad person. Our system sometimes makes people forget there's a human being behind every ticket. Ava nodded slowly. I know. I don't hate her, and I don't want anyone fired just to calm public outrage. I just want to know what the airline will choose policy, or people, because you can't claim 5-star service if it doesn't start with simple humanity. Jordan fell silent, not because he lacked an answer, but because he knew the question wasn't just for Aurelia Airlines. It was for everyone. Soft murmurs rippled through the cabin. A middle-aged man whispered, I work in banking, and it's the same there. People hide behind rules while fairness gets left behind. A young woman from the back added, policies can't replace conscience. Ava smiled gently and nodded. That's right. People create policies, not the other way around. At that moment, Sophia Nguyen's phone lit up again. A notification flashed. Diachobri Aurelia Flight Pirin, 8 million shares. She looked up, eyes shining with tears. She knew that every word spoken in this cabin, every look, every breath was now being seen by the entire world. Ava turned to her and said softly, Keep recording. Sophia, they need to see that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just a quiet conversation between two women, one who was wrong and one who chose not to strike back. Melissa bowed her head, tears dripping onto her clipboard. She whispered, I used to think following policy meant being loyal to the company. But maybe real loyalty is having the courage to admit when that policy hurts someone. Ava looked at her, her eyes warm now. If you understand that, you've already gone further than most. Not everyone has the courage to face their own mistakes. A soft ripple of applause rose from the back. No one knew who started it, but it spread, row by row, until the entire cabin joined in. It wasn't applause for a spectacle. It was gratitude. Gratitude for two women, one brave enough to admit she was wrong, and one brave enough to forgive. Captain Jordan Miles stood silently, watching. In all his years flying thousands of routes, he had never seen a first-class cabin so quiet, yet so full of meaning. Outside the window, clouds drifted past the wings. The aircraft seemed to move through a different kind of light, the light of awareness. Ava spoke softly, almost to herself. People can change a policy with a few lines of text, but changing how we see one another, that takes much more. The first-class cabin had grown quiet again. No voices, no murmurs, just the low hum of the engines and the thin noon sunlight spilling through the windows. It caught the side of Ava Robinson's face, calm, steady, but changed. Her eyes no longer looked inward. They carried the weight of someone who had seen the larger picture behind the storm. As the plane descended toward Dallas, most people thought the turbulence was over, that what remained was routine, a few apologies, a press statement, and soon the world would move on, as it always did. But Ava knew better. Injustice never ends on the surface. It only grows quiet, waiting for someone brave enough to look beneath it. The plane's wheels touched the runway with a soft screech, pulling everyone back into reality. As the seatbelt sign blinked off, Ava's encrypted corporate phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Dr. Naomi Brooks, Internal Ethics Committee. Ava hesitated for one beat, then answered, Naomi, it's me. The voice on the other end was low, urgent. Ava, I just watched the video. Everything's spiraling. But you need to know this isn't just about a flight attendant. Ava said nothing. There was something in Naomi's tone heavy, restrained, as if she had been holding it in for too long. Tell me everything. Naomi, I need the truth. Naomi drew a breath. There are 8 official discrimination complaints from the past year: black passengers, Asian staff, even older women. All of them were scrubbed from the audit logs before the FAA inspection. I tried to raise it, but they told me, don't stir the media. The cabin around Ava seemed to disappear. For a moment, there was no Dallas, no sky, only those words sinking like stones into still water. Who buried the reports? The VP of HR and the legal advisor? They were afraid of stock damage. Ava. They didn't just ignore them, they falsified submission dates and signatures to dodge oversight. Ava's voice dropped, slow and measured. So it wasn't Melissa who failed, it was the system itself. Naomi's voice softened. I'm afraid so. And you know, only someone with real authority can clean this up. Ava didn't reply immediately. Outside the window, Dallas shimmered beneath a thin layer of cloud, and somewhere down there stood the headquarters of Aurelia Air Group. She had once believed in that building, in its polished glass, and corporate promises believed that technology and policy could build fairness. Now she saw it clearly. Policies only work when people behind them have integrity. A minute of silence passed between the two women. Then Ava spoke. Naomi, preserve every document. I want full access to the internal report and the names of whoever ordered the edits. Naomi hesitated. Ava, you're starting a war. Are you sure you want to? Ava cut in, her tone calm but absolute, the kind that left no room for hesitation. Naomi, when silence becomes complicity, speaking the truth isn't bravery, it's duty. At the front of the plane, Melissa Crane stood by the door, bowing slightly as passengers disembarked. When Ava approached, Melissa lifted her eyes, wanting to speak, but Ava stopped for just a moment. "Melissa," she said quietly, "I don't want you to lose your job, but if you truly want to make this right, tell the truth. All of it. Before and after I boarded this plane." Tears welled as Melissa nodded. "I will. Not because I'm afraid of punishment, but because, for the first time, I can see how I helped create the problem." Ava placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then you've already taken the first step to fixing it." As she stepped off the plane, Jamal Reeves caught up with her. "I just heard the board's in an emergency session. Someone's trying to spin this, saying the video was edited out of context." Ava gave a faint, knowing smile. "They'll say many things, Jamal. But truth doesn't need to shout it, just needs people unafraid to listen." Jamal nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. He'd covered scandals before, but rarely had he seen someone face one with such poise, calm enough to make an entire system tremble. In the car ride toward Aurelia's Dallas headquarters, Ava's phone buzzed twice more. A message from Naomi. "I've sent you copies of the files. 8 complaints, 5 forged signatures. 3 reclassified as resolved. One of them was filed by Melissa herself 8 months ago, about a black passenger being forced to switch seats. She had seen it before, and she did try to stop it." Ava stared at the message for a long time. A knot tightened in her chest, disappointment mixed with something like sorrow. Not pity for Melissa, but for a system that taught good people to stay silent just to keep their jobs. She remembered Naomi's words. Someone has to stand up, and she knew that someone was her. When the car pulled up to the glass tower of Aurelia Air Group, Ava stepped out into the fierce Texas sunlight. Under that brightness, there was nowhere left for anything to hide. She called Naomi again, her tone steady as steel. "Schedule an emergency meeting with the Ethics Committee and the FAA. I want every file made public before anyone has the chance to delete a single line." Naomi's voice wavered with emotion. "Ava, you're doing what so many here have dreamed of doing, if only they'd had your courage." Ava smiled faintly. "I'm not doing it out of courage, Naomi. I'm doing it because if I don't, no one will." When Ava Robinson stepped into the elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirrored steel. A slender woman, quiet, composed, but in her eyes burned a resolve that nothing could shake. The doors slid shut, sealing her inside that reflection of cold metal and glass, and with it, the beginning of her journey from personal justice to systemic justice. By the time she entered the boardroom on the 23rd floor of Aurelia Air Group, the Dallas sky had already turned gold with sunset. Light poured through the tall windows, washing her face in a soft amber glow, serene on the surface, but beneath it, the stillness that follows a storm. The call with Naomi had opened the door to the truth, and Ava knew that door could never be closed again. But what troubled her most wasn't the 8 buried complaints. It was the people. People like Melissa, caught in a system that blurred the line between compliance and complicity. The meeting unfolded in silence. Melissa Crane sat across from Ava, beside Brian Carter, the junior attendant from the flight. Their hands were clasped tightly in their laps, eyes down, unable to meet her gaze. There was no anger left in the room, only the heavy weight of truth. Ava began softly, her voice low, and even I didn't come here to find someone to take the blame. I came to understand what makes an airline so proud of its ethics. Forget compassion in its own skies. Melissa lifted her head, eyes red-rimmed. She had cried all morning, but now her tears were gone. Only exhaustion remained. I was afraid. Mrs. Robinson. Afraid of losing my job. I've seen others speak up only to be transferred or demoted. So I just followed procedure. I thought that was the only way to survive. Ava studied her quietly. You think you were following procedure, but sometimes procedure is how people stop thinking. And when we stop thinking, we stop seeing each other as human. Melissa bowed her head, fingers trembling. I know. I see it now. When I told you, policy is policy, I heard myself sound like a machine. No heart, no feeling, just fear. The room fell utterly still. Then Brian Carter, who had been silent until now, spoke, his voice hoarse and shaking. I'm guilty too. I've seen it happen more than once. An Asian woman told to change seats. A black couple ignored when they asked for help. I saw it all, and I stayed quiet. He paused, breathing hard, each word heavy as stone. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't have the authority. But really, I just didn't have the courage. Ava looked up, her gaze warm, not condemning, just deeply human. No, Brian, you did speak only in silence. The air froze again. Her words didn't need emphasis. They simply landed, awakening something in everyone present. Brian lowered his head, hands trembling. Melissa turned to him and whispered, Maybe we've all been speaking through silence for too long. In that moment, the tension shifted from guilt to awakening. The sterile boardroom became a place where people began to truly see each other again. There were no sides now, no bosses or subordinates. No right or wrong, only recognition. Ava spoke softly, almost like telling an old story when I was little. My mother worked as a housekeeper for a white family. She used to tell me, Child, they can silence you, but they can't make you agree. I didn't fully understand back then. Now I do. Our long silence, that's how prejudice survives. Her eyes met Melissa's. What matters isn't that you were wrong today, Melissa. It's whether you'll choose not to be silent tomorrow. Tears streamed down Melissa's face, not of shame, but release. At that moment, Dr. Naomi Brooks entered, carrying a thick folder. She nodded to Ava and placed it on the table. These are the 8 complaints we talked about. I think everyone here should see them to understand what we're truly up against. The room went quiet as she opened the file. Page after page, dates altered, names replaced, testimonies cut short, the words resolved printed in bold, as if justice were just another checkbox on a spreadsheet. Ava turned each page slowly, then murmured, No system is too broken to fix only when we pretend it isn't broken. Naomi looked at her and nodded gently. And because people like you exist. Ava, there's still hope. Later. Melissa lingered in the hallway after the meeting. The golden lights from the ceiling cast long reflections on the tile. Ava's footsteps approached, soft and steady. Where are you going? Ava asked. Melissa shook her head. I don't know. I just feel ashamed to look anyone in the eye. Ava stood beside her. Shame is the first step toward awareness. Melissa, but don't let it hold you back. If you truly want to change, stay. I need people who understand the cost of silence to help rebuild this system. Melissa looked up, startled. You still trust me? Ava smiled faintly. I don't believe in perfection. I believe in the power to learn from our mistakes. Her voice deepened, soft but steady. You don't have to be a saint to do what's right. Just a person who still knows how to care and how to think. At the end of the hallway, Brian Carter had stopped, listening to every word. His eyes glistened as he spoke. "If you need someone to testify to the truth, I'll be the first." Ava smiled. "Good. Because justice doesn't begin with laws. It begins with one person brave enough to say, 'I'll tell what really happened.'" That night, from the window of the 23rd floor, the lights of Dallas shimmered across Ava Robinson's face. She looked down at the glowing city and exhaled softly. The storm was no longer in the sky. It had moved inside the human heart. But this time, that fire wouldn't burn things down. It would light the way. The next morning, as the first light touched the glass tower of Aurelia Air Group, Ava Robinson's phone rang. The screen flashed Washington, D.C. FAA emergency session. This time, no one could hide. And in the heart of that storm, something no one expected was about to happen. The very person who once buried the truth would be the first to break. The sky over Dallas was heavy with clouds. Inside the 23rd floor boardroom of Aurelia's headquarters, the air felt thick enough to touch. Outside, the wind whipped through a line of flags bearing the silver-blue logo, each one trembling, just like the silence inside. Last night had brought tears, confessions, and the awakening of conscience. But this morning wasn't about guilt. It was the day justice began to take shape. Because truth, if not spoken in the light, is only another shadow of silence. Ava Robinson stood by the window, looking down at the city. In the distance, the Dallas airport shimmered faintly in the morning mist. Jets bearing the Aurelia emblem rolled down the runway, still carrying thousands of passengers, still carrying their trust. But inside this building, that very trust was being tested. The long boardroom table reflected the pale morning light. Around it sat the senior directors Richard Hale, Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Naomi Brooks, Head of Ethics, the Communications Chief, and the company's General Counsel. Everyone knew this would not be an ordinary meeting. Ava's phone buzzed again. On the screen, Richard Hale, incoming call. She pressed answer. The room went dead silent. "Ava, I'm sorry about everything that's happened," Richard began. "I saw the video. It's all a terrible misunderstanding. You know how the media exaggerates," Ava cut in, her voice calm. "Even you're on speaker. Richard, everyone here can hear you." There was a pause. Then the sound of him clearing his throat, scrambling for composure. "I just wanted to say, the company will take this seriously. We'll issue a statement, accept responsibility publicly. But I hope you understand turning this into a blame campaign could damage the brand." Ava raised an eyebrow slightly. Her tone stayed soft, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "You're talking about the brand. Richard, I'm talking about people. That's the difference between us." The air seemed to thicken. Across the table, Naomi Brooks nodded faintly, her eyes saying, "Keep going." Ava continued, her voice measured. "Every word deliberate. I don't care about press releases. I care about what was buried. 8 complaints. Richard 8 cries for help that were silenced, for the sake of stock prices. On the other end," she could hear his breath catch, "who told you that the woman you ordered to keep quiet, Dr. Naomi Brooks?" All eyes turned to Naomi. She didn't look away. "I kept the evidence," she said quietly, "and I sent copies to the FAA this morning." Richard went silent. Ava's voice hardened, not in anger, but conviction. "You want to talk about brand image? Fine. Let's rebuild it by telling the truth." She looked around the table, then pressed the intercom button. Her voice carried through the building to HRD, operations, and every regional office in the Western Division. This is Ava Robinson, CEO of Aurelia Air Group, effective immediately. We are launching a full audit of all internal complaint records within 48 hours. Every instance of discrimination, delay, or concealment will be investigated independently under FAA supervision. The room was still. Ava's tone softened, but her resolve only deepened. Regarding Flight 227. Melissa Crane will be temporarily suspended for 30 days to undergo ethics retraining and professional rehabilitation. Brian Carter will remain on duty because he had the courage to speak the truth. And, with full board approval, I am terminating the contracts of any individual proven to have deliberately discriminated, concealed, or manipulated complaint data. Naomi glanced at her, a faint smile breaking through the tension. No one else spoke. "On the phone," Richard finally stammered. "Ava, you can't just make declarations like that on your own. You know the protocol." Her reply was slow, clear, and cold as tempered steel. "I'm not acting alone. Richard, I'm just the first person willing to say what everyone already knows, but refused to say out loud." There was a sharp breath on the line, then silence. The screen blinked. Call ended. No one moved. 1 second. 2. 3. Then Jamal Reeves, the journalist who had been invited to observe, whispered, "You just made the entire aviation industry look itself in the mirror." Ava turned to him, her calm smile returning. "I only did what they should have done long ago, listen to passengers instead of judging them." Outside, the clouds began to break. The first ray of sunlight cut through, shining across the bold letters on the glass facade Aurelia Air Group. It glowed like a quiet punctuation mark at the end of a storm. In the hallway, Melissa Crane stood silently, eyes red. When she heard the word suspension, she didn't flinch. She simply nodded. But when Ava said retraining, not firing, tears spilled down her cheeks. Not from fear, but from forgiveness. Nearby, Brian Carter exhaled a long, relieved breath. He knew the truth hadn't just saved Ava. It had saved him from the shadow of his own silence. Naomi gathered her papers, then looked at Ava with quiet admiration. "You know, Ava," she said softly, "maybe justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it starts with one person who refuses to look away." Ava smiled faintly. "I'm not trying to win. Naomi, I just want people to learn what I learned that day, that no one is too small to make a difference, if they have the courage to tell the truth." That afternoon, the company's official statement went live. Aurelia Air Group stands for transparency, respect, and equity for every passenger, every employee, every color, every voice. Beneath it, the video of Flight 227 continued to spread no longer as a scandal, but as a living lesson of how justice can rise without shouting. Ava watched the clip one more time. This time, her chest didn't tighten. She saw herself calm, steady, and realized that sometimes the quietest voice becomes the loudest thunder. Her phone buzzed again. A message from the FAA federal hearing confirmed 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Ava looked out the window. The sky over Dallas was clear now, washed in light. But behind that brightness, a new challenge waited to turn one woman's act of conscience into true, lasting reform. Long after the press conference ended, the lights inside Aurelia Air Group headquarters still burned against the Dallas night. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only one office window glowing high on the 23rd floor. Ava Robinson sat alone by the glass. Outside, a gentle rain softened the city lights, turning traffic into shimmering trails of gold and red. The procedures were now in motion: audits, investigations, reforms. But Ava knew something paper could never fix: justice written down could not heal a wound left inside the human heart. That morning, she had made the entire board bow their heads. She held the power, now the power to fire, to restructure, to redefine an entire system. Yet she also understood real power isn't in forcing others to kneel. It's in how you choose to stand after you win. The office door opened quietly. Melissa Crane stepped in, pale and sleepless. She lingered a moment, then spoke softly. "I just wanted to see you once more before I leave Dallas." Ava nodded toward the chair across from her. "You're not being fired." "Melissa." "I know," Melissa whispered, her voice trembling. "But I don't think I deserve to wear that uniform again. I don't even know where to begin making it right." Ava watched her, not as an accuser, not as a victim, but as one human being seeing another caught beneath the weight of her own guilt. Melissa's hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Robinson. I truly am. I don't hate people of color. I was just afraid. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of punishment. I thought if I just followed the rules, I'd be safe. But that day, I hurt someone else just to protect my fear." Ava stayed silent. She had heard words like these all her life from people who said, "I didn't mean any harm," from those who claimed they were just following orders. But this time, something in Melissa's voice stopped her from feeling anger. Maybe because Ava could see what Melissa really was: a product of a system that trains people to stay silent. Ava stood and walked to the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass, each drop marking the slow rhythm of time itself. "Melissa," she said quietly, "do you know what's worse than hate?" Melissa looked up. "Indifference," Ava said, "because hate still means a person is reacting. Indifference kills kindness from the inside out. And on that plane, you weren't cruel. You were indifferent." Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes, and I let it happen right there, in front of everyone. Ava turned back, her gaze soft but unwavering. "I'm not here to destroy you, Melissa. I'm here to fix what created you." The words drifted through the quiet room like a breath of wind, gentle, but powerful enough to make Melissa break down in tears. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she sobbed. Ava sat beside her, voice steady and low. "Forgiveness isn't a reward. It's the beginning of responsibility. If you truly want to make things right, help me make sure no one in this company repeats what happened that day. Come back, learn, and become someone I can trust." Melissa looked up, her eyes shining through tears. "I will. I promise." Ava nodded. "Then let's start here, not as boss and employee, but as two people who once stood on opposite sides of a mistake, and now choose to walk through it together." Later that night, after Melissa left, Naomi Brooks entered the office carrying a cup of hot tea. She set it on the desk and gave Ava a look somewhere between concern and admiration. "You forgave her again," Naomi said quietly, half scolding, half tender. "You know they don't all deserve your kindness." Ava smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But if I only punish, I become like them people who think fear is the only way to keep order. I choose differently. I want to rebuild through trust." Naomi sat beside her, thoughtful. "You're creating something new. Ava, a different kind of justice." Ava shook her head gently. "Not a different kind. The real kind. Justice as repair, not as revenge. When people are seen, they want to change. When they're condemned, they only want to hide." The room fell quiet. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle. Naomi's eyes glistened. "You know, Ava, if one day they tell this story, I hope they remember that you chose to heal when everyone else chose to break." Ava looked out the window, where the last drops of rain slid down the glass like fading stars. "If I can make even one person like Melissa look inward, then maybe this system can be healed too." The next day, the Justice as Repair program was born. It didn't begin with slogans or training slides, but with an empty room and a single chair. Anyone who had ever been disciplined for bias or complained about mistreatment was invited to sit there not to defend themselves, but to listen. They listened as passengers, the very people they had once ignored or dismissed, told their stories. No shouting, no blame, only truth and tears. Naomi called it the courtroom without a judge, but Ava simply called it the moment when one human finally sees another. When the first session ended, Ava walked through the Dallas airport. An older passenger recognized her and approached. "Thank you for not losing your temper, Ms. Robinson. If it had been me, I'd have caused a scene." Ava smiled, her voice gentle as ever. Sometimes, calm is the loudest noise the world needs to hear. And from that moment on, her story spread far beyond any viral video, not as a scandal, but as a testament to how human beings can become better. The morning sky over Dallas was crystal clear after a night of rain. Sunlight streamed through the glass facade of Aurelia Air Group's tower, stretching long golden streaks across the floor, traces of a chapter that had finally closed. Ava Robinson stepped out of the conference room, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Below her, the lobby was alive with movement employees, reporters, passengers, all gathering near the main hall. Today was the official national launch of the Justice as Repair initiative. But for Ava, it was more than a ceremony. It was the day justice could finally be seen, not written, not filed, but lived. Last night, she had forgiven not in words, but in action. And that calm she felt wasn't the end of a storm. It was the beginning of a new journey, the journey to bring justice off the page and into real life. That morning, the press surrounded the entrant CNN, NBC, and dozens of independent outlets. When Ava appeared, no one shouted, no one pushed forward. A quiet, respectful hush fell over the crowd. A reporter called out softly, voice trembling with emotion. "Ms. Robinson, do you think you've won?" Ava paused, then smiled. "If justice were a race, no one wins. We just learn how not to step back." The line spread across social media within minutes, but what truly moved people wasn't caught on camera. That same morning at Dallas Airport, Flight 227, where it had all begun, prepared for takeoff once again. Same route, same crew. Only this time, every person on board understood the value of each look, each word, each small act. Melissa Crane wore her uniform again. No nameplate, just a small patch that read crew member. She stepped into the cabin, pausing by seat 1A. A middle-aged black passenger looked up from his newspaper. Melissa smiled gently, a real smile, the kind she had forgotten she could give. "Good morning, sir. Thank you for flying with us today." No one filmed it. No one applauded. But somewhere inside her, something was finally washed clean. That same day, the FAA released its preliminary report. Violations exposed. Names held accountable. But what caught the nation's attention was Ava Robinson's statement at the Miami press conference. "I'm not here to punish the past. I'm here to make sure what's wrong today has no place to live tomorrow. Justice should never be the final strike. It should be the hand that helps people find their way back. It was the first time in FAA history that a CEO refused to read a scripted speech and spoke instead from the heart. That afternoon, Ava's plane landed in Miami, home of the Regional Coordination Center. Hundreds gathered to greet her not with cheers, but with quiet respect. They didn't see a winner. They saw someone who had endured, understood, and forgiven. Among the crowd stood Melissa Crane, Naomi Brooks, Brian Carter, and Jamal Reeves. As the plane touched down, silence filled the cabin. No applause, only the soft rhythm of breathing, as if everyone was lost in their own reflection. Naomi leaned toward Ava and whispered, "You know, Ava, I think this is the first time I've seen a flight land and no one clapped, because they were too busy thinking." Ava smiled. Maybe silence is another way to say thank you. Before the cameras, Ava spoke only a few simple words. "I am not a victim. I'm a witness to a world learning how to be kinder. And if today I'm being honored, please remember, this justice doesn't come from me. It comes from everyone who chose not to stay silent." Her voice was calm, but her words traveled farther than any headline. Meanwhile, at another corner of the airport, Melissa Crane sat quietly near a window, watching sunlight gleam on the body of a departing jet. Brian Carter walked over and handed her a cup of coffee. "You did great today," he said. Melissa smiled faintly, eyes still on the runway. "I used to be afraid of seat 1A. Now, when I look at it, I just see a chance to begin again." She paused, then murmured as if to herself, "Maybe that's what compassion really is. Justice doesn't end when we're punished. It begins when we truly want to change." At that same moment in Dallas, the evening news showed a group of aviation students pasting a poster on a classroom wall. "Justice as repair. There is no true justice without kindness." One student told a reporter, "We're not just learning how to fly planes. We're learning how not to let prejudice take flight inside us." That night, Ava stood alone on the balcony of her Miami hotel. The city glowed beneath her like a field of stars. She closed her eyes, listening to the ocean's distant waves, the sound of salt, wind, and freedom. And in that quiet moment, she understood justice had finally landed, not with the roar of an engine, but with the silence of hearts that had changed. The next morning, a plain envelope arrived at her door. No sender, no note, just a single photograph. It showed seat 1A empty, with a folded piece of paper resting on the cushion. "Thank you for seeing me, even when I didn't deserve to be seen." Signed, Melissa Crane. Ava smiled, because she knew the journey of justice doesn't end when the plane touches down, but when people learn to take flight again inside themselves. The morning sun over Miami was dazzling after a night of rain. The sea still shimmered with soft waves, but inside the glass tower of Aurelia Air Group, preparations were underway for an emergency meeting, one unlike anything the industry had ever seen. From the coast, sunlight danced on the water, but on the 30th floor, that light didn't seem to reach. The air was heavy as if the entire aviation world were holding its breath. The video had ended. The flight had landed. The world had fallen quiet for a beat. But as every camera turned toward Ava Robinson, she knew the calm after the storm was only the beginning of a new one, a storm called responsibility. Before her sat dozens of tense faces, senior executives, PR advisors, alliance representatives, and 2 officials from the FAA. Everyone waited for her to speak. Richard Hale, the COO who once buried the truth, sat with his head bowed. Beside him, Naomi Brooks opened her laptop, her eyes clear. knowing that today's decision would change everything. Ava stood, no notes, no speech. Her voice was low, deliberate, as if she were speaking to the conscience of everyone in the room. We've lived too long inside the comfort of procedure. And while we've counted seats, tracked flight hours, and measured revenue, we forgot the one thing that keeps an airline alive: trust. No one spoke. Even the hum of the air conditioner sounded sharp. Today, we didn't just lose a passenger. We lost the trust of the public and of the people who wear this uniform. If we don't change from the root, no restructuring, no PR strategy will ever fix it. We'll just be putting makeup on a scar that hasn't healed. She walked to the screen at the end of the table and pressed a button. A phrase appeared in bold white letters: Fair Sky Policy. Naomi looked up and understood immediately this was the plan Ava had been crafting through the night. While the FAA prepared its inquiry, Ava continued, calm and clear, effective immediately. I'm launching the Fair Sky Policy. It has 3 pillars. A full retraining of every Aurelia employee within 45 days from flight attendants to management, not in rules, but in dialogue, awareness, and human dignity. A 5-year reverse audit of internal data. Every complaint once shelved will be reopened and reported publicly to the Ethics Board. Full transparency in finance, operations, and accountability, because if an airline can hide bias, it can hide anything. At the far end of the table, the CFO finally spoke, voice tight with fear. Robinson, if we disclose everything, the stock will crash. We could lose hundreds of millions. Ava met his eyes, her tone light but unyielding. Disruption is the price of justice. And if there's a price to doing what's right, I'd rather pay it now before the world makes us pay tenfold later. The room fell silent. It was a line that later appeared in headlines across the country, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Richard Hale finally lifted his head. Ava, you really think you can turn the whole system around? You can't do this alone. Ava looked at him, her expression neither angry nor cold, just quietly sad. I'm not alone. Richard, there are 12,000 people wearing the Aurelia uniform right now waiting for us to prove they work for a company worth believing in. And if even one person dares to begin, it's no longer alone. Naomi nodded, her voice steady. We used to think justice came from courts. Today, it starts right here in these seats. When the board voted, the plan passed unanimously. Ava signed the first directive. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from knowing that every stroke of her pen would change thousands of lives. She turned to Naomi and said quietly, I don't want this to be a reaction. I want it to become a culture. Naomi smiled, half teasing, half in awe. If you can pull that off, Ava, history won't remember you as a CEO. It'll remember you as the woman who taught an entire industry how to treat people. Outside, a strong wind swept the city, scattering newspapers that bore her face. On the front page, Fair Sky Policy Aurelia launches historic reform. On social media, the hashtag Wash Your Fair Sky Policy began to trend. A young flight attendant posted today, I learned that justice isn't about who gets punished. It's about who gets seen and heard. And from a passenger once scarred by discrimination came this comment, I don't need a perfect airline. I just need an honest one. And today, Aurelia dared to be that. By evening, as the meeting ended, Ava stepped into the hallway. The sunset poured through the glass, glinting off the new metal plaque mounted beside the Aurelia emblem. Fair Sky begins with us. She stood there for a long moment, Naomi came beside her and laid a hand on her shoulder. Tired. Ava smiled softly. Exhausted. But I've never felt this high in the air. That night, as Miami glittered under city lights. Ava opened her email. A new message from the FAA appeared on the screen. Invitation Interagency Conference on Aviation Equity Policy. Washington, D.C., 72 hours. Ava leaned back, exhaling a small smile. The skies were calm now, but the real mission, to carry justice beyond Aurelia, was only about to begin. A year after the incident aboard Aurelia Flight 227, the skies over America somehow felt wider. Not because there were fewer clouds, but because people had begun to look at one another differently. What began as a crisis had become a movement. Ava Robinson's Fair Sky policy grew into a global model for reform. Major airlines Delta, British Airways, Air France. ANA reached out to Aurelia Air Group to learn. It was no longer one company's story, but the industry's collective journey to rediscover human dignity. 3 days after the emergency summit in Miami, Ava stood at the podium in Washington, D.C., facing hundreds of airline executives and government officials. She spoke simply. Justice cannot live only on the ground. It must fly with every flight in every glance and every act of respect. No one knew then that those words would, within a year, become a guiding principle across the world. By June of the following year, the FAA's annual report carried a single, quiet line that made the entire industry pause. Complaints related to racial discrimination in U.S. aviation have decreased by 60% following the adoption of Fair Sky principles. But numbers were only the surface. What truly moved people was the change happening inside the hearts of those within the system. At Aurelia's training center in Dallas, a small class met every Friday. At the front of the room stood Melissa Crane, the very woman once at the center of it all. She was no longer the proud chief flight attendant she used to be, but a storyteller, the most honest voice about prejudice and awakening. On the projector, she replayed the old 6-minute video that had shaken the world. Her voice still trembled as she said back then, "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought justice meant following the rules, but I was wrong. True justice begins when we dare to look at someone and ask, if that were me, could I bear it?" Around the room, young attendants lowered their heads. Some wiped their eyes. After class, a young white crewman approached quietly. "I used to think staying out of trouble was the safest thing to do," he said, "but now I realize silence is its own kind of mistake." Melissa nodded, smiling softly. "I know. I used to be silent, too." Meanwhile, Ava Robinson, once known simply as the woman in the video, was now recognized around the world by another title, the CEO who grounded bias. Not because she fired people, but because she dared to face the system and chose to repair it instead of erase it. Top business schools, Harvard, Stanford. Wharton added the Aurelia Flight 227 case to their leadership programs, not as a crisis management lesson, but as a study in humane leadership. During an interview with NBC, Ava spoke slowly, her tone calm yet warm. Justice without compassion breeds fear. Compassion without justice becomes weakness. We need both so people are not only protected, but seen. The host paused for a moment, then said softly, "Listening to you, Ms. Robinson, justice doesn't sound so frightening anymore." Ava smiled. It never was. We just forgot how to look at it through human eyes. A year later, during the anniversary ceremony at Aurelia headquarters, Naomi Brooks took the stage to read the annual results. Passenger complaints down 60%. Employee satisfaction up 42%. Internal bias-related incidents cut nearly in half. Applause filled the hall, but Ava sat quietly near the back, holding a small notebook. Inside, a single sentence she had written the day the crisis began. If I can make one person in the system pause and think before they judge, then I've already won. That afternoon, Ava left the hall and walked through the airport. An elderly white man approached and shook her hand. "I'm a retired pilot," he said. "I've followed your story since day one. Thank you for doing what my generation never dared to." Ava returned the handshake, smiling gently. "I only did what anyone could do, kept the sky fair. Not just for me, but for everyone." Later that same year, the International Air Transport Association, IATA, officially adopted Fair Sky as a global ethics framework, not just a set of rules, but a required human respect program for all international flight crews. Across airports in Europe and Asia, signs began appearing with the handwritten slogan Ava had once scrawled on a notepad: "Every seat deserves respect." And in a quiet corner of the Seattle Aviation Museum, they placed a single exhibit, the Seat 1A, where it all began. Beside it, a small bronze plaque read, "Dedicated to those who chose dignity over anger." Melissa often brought new trainees there. She would stop before the display and say, "This was the seat I once thought belonged only to those who fit the standard. But thanks to her, I learned the real standard is how we treat each other when no one's watching." Sam. Late one evening, Ava sat by her office window in Miami, watching Aurelia planes lift into the night sky, their lights blinking like constellations. Naomi entered quietly, setting a cup of tea on the desk. "You know, Ava," she said softly, "I finally understand why they call you the woman who made justice fly." Ava chuckled, eyes still on the glowing skyline. "I didn't make justice fly, Naomi. I just reminded it that it already had wings." Outside, the Miami sky glittered. An Aurelia jet climbed toward the moon, its silver body reflecting the words "Fair Sky" across its side. A quiet reminder that some wounds begin in a single seat, but sometimes they're healed by an entire sky. 3 months after the Fair Sky policy officially became a global standard, the headquarters of Aurelia Air Group in Miami stood shining with a new face. Atop the glass tower, a blue and white flag waved proudly, embroidered with the words, "Fair Sky, equality takes flight." It wasn't a slogan anymore. It was a promise kept. After a year of turbulence, the aviation world had finally learned to look inward. But for Ava Robinson, that was never enough. She had always believed true justice doesn't end when people stop doing wrong, it begins when they start doing right. So, on a quiet autumn morning, Ava announced the creation of the Fair Sky Fund, a foundation to support victims of bias, discrimination, and abuse of power in the workplace, not just for aviation, but for any field where silence had once been forced by injustice. The launch ceremony was small. No red carpet, just a few journalists, former employees, and people who had once been discriminated against in silence. Ava stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was soft, steady, the kind that didn't demand attention, yet held the whole room still. "I don't want to be remembered as someone who won. I want to be remembered as someone who once fell and helped others rise with her." The room went silent. No cameras flashed. No cheers broke out. Just quiet eyes glistening, because someone had finally spoken the words they'd never dared to say. Through the Fair Sky Fund, several programs took flight. The 1A Scholarship, for underprivileged students studying ethical leadership. The Second Seat, a career restoration program for people who lost their jobs to discrimination. Wings of Repair, a global network linking nonprofits that fight workplace prejudice. Every Monday morning, Ava arrived at the foundation office not as a CEO, but as a woman with a coffee cup, a handful of notes, and her familiar grounded smile. People often said her true power wasn't in her title. It was in her ability to make kindness a system. One afternoon, at a Georgetown University seminar, a student asked Mrs. Robinson, "What do you think is your greatest legacy?" Ava paused for a few seconds, then smiled gently. "That I helped people believe that kindness isn't weakness." The audience rose to their feet in applause, but Ava simply bowed her head, knowing that legacies don't live in applause, they live in the quiet choices people make once the lights go out. Meanwhile, Melissa Crane, the woman once at the center of the storm, had become one of the goodwill ambassadors of the Fair Sky Fund. She visited trade schools and customer service centers, sharing her story. No denial, no excuses. Every talk began the same way: "I was wrong. But I'm grateful for the person who didn't turn my mistake into a life sentence." She was no longer the woman who ruined a flight. She had become proof that justice and restoration can walk hand in hand. Reporters often asked Ava, "Why don't you turn Fair Sky into a personal brand? It could make you billions." She would just smile, calm, unwavering. If justice needs a trademark, then it's no longer justice. They say Ava's office held only one framed photo, an empty seat 1A, with a handwritten note above it that read, "Respect is not a seat. It's a way of flying." A year after the fund's creation, the New York Times published a long feature titled Ava Robinson, the Woman Who Repaired the Sky. It opened with the line, "When justice felt too far away, she brought it back to earth. And when the world rushed to find someone to blame, she searched for ways to heal." The article went viral, but Ava's life didn't change. She still took the same city bus to work, poured her own coffee every morning, and treated fame not as a reward, but as a side effect of living by her principles. Late one evening, inside the quiet office of the Fair Sky Fund, Naomi Brooks walked in. She found Ava writing by hand on a sealed envelope, her handwriting a little shaky with age. On the envelope, it said, "For whoever sits in 1A next, fly kindly." Naomi asked softly, "What do you think will remain after you're gone?" Ava looked up toward the window, where the lights of a departing plane blinked against the night sky. "Not my name," she said. "Just the belief that somewhere out there, someone still chooses calm over anger, understanding over judgment." Naomi nodded. They sat in silence, listening to the sound of an aircraft climbing higher, the steady heartbeat of a sky finally at peace. The next morning, a new message appeared. On the Fair Sky Foundation homepage, "Justice is not punishment. It is restoration." Beneath it, the Aurelia logo, a single wing stretching upward into a clear blue sky. 3 years later, Ava Robinson quietly stepped down as CEO. No farewell gala, no speech. She left behind one final letter for all Aurelia employees. "If tomorrow I'm no longer here, remember the sky doesn't belong to any one of us. It belongs to all who are brave enough to look at one another with respect." And on a bright morning soon after, She disappeared from the lens of the media as if justice itself, once it had finished its work, had chosen to leave the world in quiet peace. 3 years had passed since the birth of the Fair Sky Fund. The world had changed not with fanfare or fireworks, but through small, steady acts, like gentle winds clearing the clouds of prejudice from the sky of humankind. Across 5 continents, airlines flew beneath a single shared banner. Equality takes flight. From New York to Nairobi, from Tokyo to Toronto, people no longer spoke only of service. They spoke of dignity. Justice no longer felt distant. It lived quietly in a smile, in the way someone offered a seat, or simply in the silence of mutual respect. When Ava Robinson stepped down as CEO, reporters asked if she felt regret. She only smiled. No one ever truly leaves a journey they've once flown with their heart. And then, she disappeared from the spotlight as if justice itself, having finished its work, had chosen to step aside and let the world carry it toward. One crisp spring morning, Ava returned not in a boardroom, not on television, but aboard an ordinary Aurelia Air commercial flight. She booked a regular ticket, used no privileges, brought only a small suitcase and an old notebook. When she entered the first-class cabin, a young flight attendant greeted her nervously. "Welcome back, Mrs. Robinson." Ava smiled gently. "Just call me Ava. Today, I'm only a passenger." Her seat assignment was 1A, the very same seat that had once changed her life and the history of aviation itself. That flight was bound for Seattle, where the Museum of Aviation was opening a new exhibit, Fair Skies, the journey of kindness. As the plane taxied, the morning light poured through the window. Ava rested her hand on the armrest, a simple gesture, yet heavy with years of memory. Once, this seat had symbolized privilege. Today, it was simply a place for anyone who knew how to respect others. Beside her sat a young white woman named Lily, about 25. When she recognized Ava, her voice trembled slightly. "You're the woman from that video, aren't you? The one who changed everything?" Ava smiled softly. "I was just someone who had to stand up, so that others could sit in peace." Lily looked out the window, eyes shining. "I'm a flight attendant. Your story made me choose this job. I've learned that serving isn't about bowing, it's about showing respect." Ava nodded, warmth glimmering in her gaze. "If you understand that, then justice is already flying with us." After serving drinks, another young attendant hesitated, then asked quietly, "Mrs. Robinson, if someone asked you what justice really means, what would you say?" Ava was silent for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the engines blend with her heartbeat. She looked out the window, where the clouds layered like soft white waves, and spoke, her voice calm, steady, almost like a prayer. "Justice isn't revenge. It's making sure no one loses their seat in life." The attendant froze, not fully understanding the depth of it, but feeling the weight of its peace. Because only someone who had faced injustice and still chosen compassion could speak words like that. The flight continued smoothly, clear skies. No turbulence. Ava opened her notebook. On the final page, in her own handwriting, were the words, "When the sky is fair, justice belongs to everyone." She closed it and leaned back. At 10,000 meters, the world seemed small, and the lines between class, color, and power faded into nothing. Up here, there were only people equal, free, and deserving. When the plane landed in Seattle, passengers rose from their seats. Some recognized her. No one asked for photos or autographs. They simply smiled and bowed the kind of bow that comes from gratitude. Ava returned the gesture with gentle eyes, no longer the smile of a victor, but of someone who had come to understand forgiveness and the quiet beauty of restoration. At the gate, she was met by Naomi Brooks, now the honorary director of the Fair Sky Fund. Naomi took her hand and said softly, "I used to think justice was a fight, but you made me realize sometimes it's just a quiet seat inside the human heart." Ava smiled, her eyes glistening. "Yes, justice doesn't need to shout. Naomi, it doesn't need to prove itself. It just needs to live like the air we breathe." The two women walked out of the airport together, blending into the crowd. No cameras, no attention. Only sunlight on their shoulders, shimmering softly like wings. That evening, at the Aviation Museum, amid hundreds of exhibits, stood a photograph of Ava sitting in seat 1A, bathed in warm, golden light. Beneath it, a single line was engraved, "Justice is not a seat. It's how we share the sky." As night fell, hundreds of planes streaked across the heavens, their lights forming long, glowing threads, as if stitching back together a sky once torn by prejudice. Justice, after all its storms, had finally found its true shape not as punishment, but as understanding. And somewhere, high above that vast night sky, an older woman with silver hair sat quietly in seat 1A, smiling faintly as she heard the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for takeoff." The plane rose through the clouds into silver light, and justice, at last, belonged to everyone. The story: Black CEO denied first-class seat 6 minutes later. She fired the flight attendant. On the Spot is more than a shocking incident. It's a mirror reflecting our world, where prejudice, power, and human dignity collide every single day. But what makes this story different is how Ava Robinson chose to respond. She didn't choose anger. She didn't choose revenge. She chose wisdom and compassion, because she understood that true justice isn't found in punishment, but in restoration and awakening what's human inside us. This story reminds us in life, every one of us will face moments of misunderstanding, disrespect, or injustice. But how we respond, that's what defines who we are. Remember, dignity is something no one can take from you unless you give it away. And justice, in the end, isn't just about reclaiming your own seat. It's about making sure no one else ever loses theirs again. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you stop and think, please give this video a like, share it with others. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, where we tell stories of courage, dignity, and the quiet power of kindness. Because sometimes, when even one person chooses calm over anger, the whole sky can change.